All right, chemists. So here we are. This one hopefully won't be quite as long. Now we're talking about alkanes to alkenes, and in particular, ethane to ethylene. So what are we trying to do here? We want to our points are to identify the industrial source of ethylene from cracking. So more from last lesson. It's a long one, and identify that ethylene, because of its high level of reactivity, thanks to its double bond, it can be transformed into useful products. Okay, so what are we actually going to do today? We're going to identify that ethylene and ethene are the same. This should be the last one where we really mix it up a lot. After this, we'll probably stick with just ethylene. We want to explain the reactivity of ethane compared to ethylene and the properties of alkanes and alkenes. Okay, so ethane and ethylene, they're our example alkane and alkene. And then we're going to talk about the cracking of ethylene from ethane in particular, like that one. So we've talked about how to get from the really large ones, but in the LNG, so liquid natural gas, we're usually just talking about ethane. So there's different ways to go about it. All right. So another use for fossil fuels. Using ethylene, we can use it for much more than burning. We can use it for rubbers, fertilizers, synthetic textiles, plastics, pharmaceuticals, and heaps more. Heaps more. So useful. The worst thing anyone ever decided to do was to burn this stuff. Ethene or ethylene is an extremely useful chemical. So you'll see it a lot in PVC, polyethylene, industrial solvents when you move on further in life, brake fluid, radiator coolants, paints, cosmetics, toothpaste, detergents, and so forth. It is a lung irritant if you breathe it in, but that's the main hazard. Produced from ethane found in petroleum gas. And here is the chemical process of that. So we crack this ethane into ethylene and hydrogen gas. So there should be like a little delta symbol there for energy. All right. So let's start with alkanes and alkenes. Basically, they're the equivalents. Okay, so we both got two C's and whatever hydrogens they'll fit. The similarities, they both have low melting points and boiling points. They're both non-polar and very weak dispersion forces and relatively insoluble, in water that is. They both combust to form carbon dioxide and water. Okay, different chemical reactions obviously because of the different number of hydrogens, but they're both the same products. The differences. Ethene or ethylene is way more reactive because of its double bond. Cool. And that reactivity, that easiness to get it to react with something else, that's why we use it in industry so extensively. Okay, so alkenes undergo addition reactions. All right, so the double bonds are broken apart and other atoms are added in. So if we were looking at hydrogen being added to ethene, so which is the reverse of the cracking, what we get, so that we put in the energy. This here is a catalyst, so we put in the energy, and these two hydrogens get added in here and here. Cool. If we do it with a halogen, which remember is a group 7 element, so chlorine, bromine, fluorine. If we add bromine to it, which is brownish and red, to ethylene, the addition goes in, and you make 1,2-dibromoethane. Alright, now that's colourless. So ethylene in bromine gives you a colourless thing. So you've now worked out a test to work out if you've got ethylene or ethane. Okay? Alright. Alkanes, on the other hand, undergo substitution reactions. So when they react with ethene, because they're saturated hydrocarbons already, so they're paraffins, there's no extra spaces, there's no extra electrons for those carbons to share, so you've got to swap the hydrogen out with something else. So ethane undergoes a breakdown. So for example, ethane undergoes a breakdown in the presence of UV light with bromine water. And you can see we've used the same halogen as our example. So here we are, if we put UV light there, what you end up with is 1-bromoethane and hydrogen bromide. Okay, so how do we get it? We crack it. Now, ethylene can be produced through the cracking of ethane. Now, ethane is actually fairly abundant, and if you go down to the Cooper Basin across Queensland and South Australia here, that's one of the main sources of it in Australia. So the LNG at the Cooper Basin is 9% ethane, and that's a lot. We crack it at about 850 degrees to produce ethylene. So it's then cooled rapidly to prevent ethane from reforming. Because if ethane reforms, that's it going backwards. If it stays heated up, that double bond will break and we'll get our ethane again. And if we leave it heating any longer than that as well, it will then decompose to solid carbon, like the whole thing will break apart. Because that's what heat does, is it breaks the bonds between chemicals. It's an endothermic reaction, therefore, so it absorbs heat from the environment, therefore the higher the heat, the higher the yields. Back to this, that's why every time we draw our energy things, it always goes up a little bit. So even if it's exothermic or if it's endothermic, there's always that bump, and that bump is the energy put in to break the bonds initially. Okay, so that's why if it stays being heated, either the ethane will decompose into hydrogen gas and solid carbon. I thought we should probably be a bit clearer on that. All right, so it's endothermic, which means it absorbs heat. So the higher the heat, the higher the yields. And that's it. That's a bit simpler, a bit smaller. I hope you appreciate the shorter video this time. Okay, see you in class.